Ladies and gentlemen, will you please join me in an invocation in your own persuasion, in your own way, however you feel about it, but just follow along, please. Dear Lord, we thank you. We thank you so much for the opportunity you give us to be here to recognize and commemorate this great day in the lives of these Korean veterans and all veterans wherever they may be. 63 years ago, 3 days ago, and 63 years ago, the landing was made at Inchon. It was the turning point in the Korean War. And for that, we're very thankful that you guided us through that, guided us through all of those situations in Korea. And we are so happy that we have with us these Republic of Korea, Korean veterans, as well as our own U.S. Korean veterans. We ask you to put your loving arms around each one of them, around their families, around all of our military, wherever they may be, in harm's way or otherwise, around the families of them and the families of those who have gone before us. We thank you for the food we are about to receive, for your bounty. We'll ask all these things in your holy name. Amen.
I have a very simple job to introduce Major General Michael J. Myatt. Everybody knows him, but I want to tell you a couple of things that you may not know about him. He was a commanding general who led the 1st Marine Division in a 4-day ground war in 1991 that defeated 7 Iraqi divisions, seized the Kuwait International Airport, and freed that city. He has served as the CEO of the Marines Memorial since 2001. He served 2 combat tours in Vietnam, and in 1987, he was promoted to Brigadier General. He was 46 years old and the youngest man in the history of the Marine Corps to be promoted to the rank of general. He retired in 1995 to go to work for Bechtel, and during that time, he managed the installation of the Korean high-speed railway in Korea. So let's welcome General Myatt.
Thank you, Colonel Stevens. I'm going to stand away from the microphone. Marianne, if you'll monitor it for me, I'd appreciate it. Make sure it's adjusted just right. Because I'm going to read something to you today, and I want to do it in a way that it keeps your attention. And instead of looking at me, if you'll adjust your chairs and look at one of these 2 screens, I think it will help you, 1, listen to me, and 2, stay awake. Because what I want to talk about is important. Today I'll talk about the leaders who shaped the circumstances leading to the amphibious operation that took place 63 years ago at a port city of the Republic of Korea called Inchon. North Korea invaded South Korea on 25 June 1950. A key figure in the story of the reactions by the United States to this invasion was General Douglas MacArthur, the senior U.S. military commander in Asia Pacific at the time. I will talk about him later. First, let's reflect back to the end of World War II, when Korea was separated into 2 parts. This separation was decided by President Roosevelt and Stalin when they met in February 1945 in Yalta. Initially, the Russians occupied North Korea, and in 1946, the U.S. and its allies kept a training constabulary in South Korea to train the South Korean Army. Back in Washington, D.C., the defense establishment was in chaos. The demobilization on the heels of victory from World War II had gutted the armed forces. America fought World War II like a football game, after which the winner leaves the field and celebrates, said General Wiedemeyer. General Marshall said it was no demobilization, it was a rout. With the advent of atomic weapons, air power was deemed to have the dominant role in American strategy. General Marshall sought to unify all services into one. General Eisenhower proposed that all services be merged into an outright single force. President Truman, a World War I field artilleryman and a loyal National Guard officer, said in 1946, "When Roosevelt was here, the place was like a damned wardroom. As long as I'm here, the admirals will never get in." General Collins, the Chief of Staff of the Army, proposed absorption of the Navy and the Marine Corps aviation into the newly formed U.S. Air Force and reducing the Marine Corps to a few ceremonial and Navy Yard Guard functions, ceding its amphibious role to the Army. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Archie Vandegrift, made his famous bended knee speech on 6 May 1946 to Congress. He said, "The Marine Corps believes that it has earned the right to have its future decided by the legislative body which created it, nothing more. Sentiment is not a valid consideration in determining questions of national security. We do not rest our case on any presumed ground of gratitude owing us from the nation. The bended knee is not a tradition of the Corps. If a Marine as a fighting man has not made a case for himself after 170 years of service, he must go. But I think you will agree with me, he's earned the right to depart with dignity and honor, not by subjugation to the status of uselessness and servility planned for him by the current War Department." It was Congress that saved the Marine Corps in 1947 by passing the National Security Act. It made amphibious warfare doctrine the unique responsibility of the Marine Corps. Over the next 2 years, Marshall and Eisenhower kept up the pressure for consolidation. In 1949, on the basis of merely concept, without any evaluation of strengths or weaknesses, President Truman pushed through Congress major changes in the National Security Act to strengthen the Air Force and the Army. Also, on October 19, 1949, Omar Bradley said, "I also predict that large-scale amphibious operations will never occur again." In December 1949, the Secretary of Defense, Lewis Johnson, told the Chief of Naval Operations, "Admiral, the Navy's on its way out. There's no reason for having a Navy and Marine Corps. General Bradley tells me amphibious operations are a thing of the past. We will never have any more amphibious operations. That does away with the Marine Corps. And the Air Force can do anything the Navy can nowadays, so that does away with the Navy." Secretary of Defense Johnson cut the Marine Corps forces to 24,000 in 1949 and cut the number of amphibious ships to 91 from a wartime high of 610 during World War II. Johnson then ordered the Navy not to train Marines and only train the Army in amphibious operations. Only Carl Vinson, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, kept Secretary of Defense Johnson from eliminating Marine aviation. At the beginning of 1950, the U.S. military was in disarray. The Army's 10 divisions were under strength and poorly trained. Garrison soft was the proper description. Additionally, our country's national security priorities were being debated. On 12 January 1950 at Washington's National Press Club, a favorite sounding board for administration policies, Secretary of Defense Dean Acheson publicized a memorandum he had received from the Joint Chiefs of Staff 3 years earlier about Korea, as follows. The Joint Chiefs of Staff consider that from the standpoint of military security, the United States has little strategic interest in maintaining the present troops and bases in Korea. He appeared to support this view. Accordingly, the U.S. ground defense posture in the Far East consisted of 4 understrength, poorly trained, garrison-soft Army divisions. Now, for brevity, you will hear me use the term ROK, ROK Army, the ROK being the acronym for the Republic of Korea. By 1950, only 500 members of the U.S. Marine Military Advisory Group had remained in South Korea. to train the ROK military forces. Plus, the advisory group had armed the ROK military with old, outdated weapons. In North Korea, it was a different situation. The North Korea People's Army, also known as the Inmin-gun, was large and well-equipped by the Soviets. It consisted of 13 well-trained divisions, including one mechanized. The force included 20,000 North Korean soldiers who had fought as part of the Chinese Communist Army against the Japanese, and several thousand officers were trained in Russia. 8 Russian Army officers were advising each division. On that fateful Sunday of 25 June 1950, North Korea caught the South Koreans off guard and invaded the Republic of Korea. Within 72 hours, North Korean communist soldiers were in Seoul. The South Korean army was in retreat down the long road south. At 3 a.m. in New York time on 25 June, the United States called for an immediate session of the United Nations Security Council. 12 hours later, the council convened, minus the Russian delegate who was boycotting, and called on United Nations members to render every assistance to South Korea. Immediately, President Truman committed the Navy and the Air Force against North Korean military forces south of the 38th parallel. On 30 June, President Truman directed General MacArthur to send U.S. ground forces to South Korea, and 406 soldiers of the 24th Infantry Division landed at an airstrip outside Pusan, and America was at war. Most in Washington, D.C. had a hard time believing that we were at war and that we were losing. The North Korean army continued to advance south. The recently arrived American regular soldiers were in headlong flight before a trained, tough, well-equipped, cocky little North Korean army. One officer in Washington had no illusions. Having commanded a platoon at Bellewood, a rifle company later, during which he was wounded 10 times, and commanded a battalion, regiment, and then the 4th Marine Division on Iwo Jima, this officer, General Clifton B. Cates, was the Commandant of the Marine Corps. To him, the oddest thing about the outbreak of trouble in Korea was that nobody had any time to see the Commandant of the Marine Corps. Officers on the Joint Staff in the Pentagon were saying that the U.S. could settle this Korean emergency without any Marines at all. On 29 June, Cates saw Admiral Sherman, the Chief of Naval Operations, in the passageway in the Pentagon. He asked CNO, "Why hasn't anyone asked for Marines?" Sherman asked, "Well, what do you have?" And Cates said, "We have a regimental combat team and an air group on the West Coast." As the situation worsened in Korea, 2 days later, CNO sent a message to MacArthur to ask for the Commandant's regiment and air group. On 3 July, the Joint Chiefs, General Bradley, General Collins, General Vandenberg, and Admiral Sherman met to discuss the dispatch from General MacArthur. His dispatch asking for the immediate movement of a regimental combat team with supporting Marine aviation to the Far East. The Joint Chiefs had reluctantly agreed to let General Cates join them in the meeting and debated whether to let the Marines go to war. General MacArthur, 8,000 miles away, was proposing a seaborne attack against the communications of the North Korean Army. After checking with President Truman on 4 July, the Joint Chiefs ordered the Marines to mount out from Southern California. To the last, Air Force General Vandenberg tried to strip the Marine aviation from the deploying force, but had to finally desist. The Marines were directed to activate the 1st Marine Provisional Brigade. Its commander was Brigadier General Edward A. Craig. He was the 1st Marine Division Assistant Division Commander and a distinguished combat leader from World War II. Meanwhile, back in Tokyo, General MacArthur called a conference with Admiral Doyle, an experienced amphibious sailor. He wanted to discuss an amphibious counterstroke far behind the enemy flank on the west coast of Korea. MacArthur had already sent a request to Washington for 1,200 specially trained amphibious engineer troops. By 8 July, it had become apparent that every soldier available in the Far East would have to defend the Pusan perimeter. Even the Marine Brigade, which MacArthur wanted to hold out for his amphibious thrust, had to be rerouted to Pusan, and only there in the nick of time. The Marine Brigade, 6,500 strong, mounted out and sailed from San Diego on July the 14th. The Marine Commandant was on hand at the docks when the brigade sailed. As he eyed the ground forces filing past, the Commandant could only have felt the Marine traditions would be upheld. Most of the PFCs were too young to have seen action in World War II, though nearly all had been well grounded in fundamentals. A glance at the NCOs, the platoon leaders, and the company commanders of the brigade could only have brought a gleam of pride to the Commandant's battle-wise eyes. They were veterans of World War II who could be relied upon to get the best out of their men. The Marine Brigade reached Korea on 2 August after 19 days at sea. It was immediately committed in defense of the desperately held corner, the Pusan perimeter. A month later, after steady fighting, it had, in the words of the London Times, saved the day many times. All this helps tell the story of the Korean War, but the fact that the Marine Brigade, magnificently supported by its aviation, literally saved the perimeter at Pusan is not, directly speaking, part of the story of Inchon, except that a gallant defense of that perimeter bought time for a counterstroke. And time, after all, was what General MacArthur needed. The strategic station was developing. The supply lines of the North Korean Army ran by land down the length of Korea, with Seoul as its point for communications. Their flanks and rear were totally exposed. On 10 July, General Shepard, the commander of Marines in the Pacific, met with General MacArthur. MacArthur said that he would like to have the entire 1st Marine Division under his command because he had a job for them to do. MacArthur pointed to Inchon on the map of Korea and said, "I would land them here," and cut the North Korean armies off from the logistic support and cause their withdrawal and annihilation. General Shepard said, "Well, why don't you ask for the 1st Marine Division?" MacArthur asked Shepard to write the dispatch. He did, and within hours, the dispatch was on the desks of the JCS in Washington, D.C. On 13 July, General Collins and Vandenberg were in Tokyo with CINCPAC Admiral Radford, and they met with General MacArthur. Collins told MacArthur, "General, you're going to have to win this war with the troops available to you here in Japan and Korea." MacArthur said, "Joe, you're going to have to change your mind." MacArthur prevailed, and before Collins left Japan, he told MacArthur, okay, he thought a full Marine division could be sent to the Far East. On 15 July, MacArthur sent his 2nd request for the 1st Marine Division and his supporting aviation. On 19 July, 9 days after he had requested the division and 4 days after his 2nd request, MacArthur still had no JCS reply. MacArthur sent the JCS still another message, stating for the 3rd time he needed a full Marine division. Marine Commandant General Cates knew that the approval of MacArthur's request would require mobilizing the entire Marine Corps Reserve, and he told the JCS this fact. So the JCS went to see President Truman at the Blair House on 19 July and recommended immediate mobilization of the Marine Corps Reserve. Truman signed the order, and that afternoon, telegrams and phone calls alerted the entire ground reserve for active service. The JCS finally replied to MacArthur on 20 July, telling him he could have a war strength division, but no sooner than November or December. Meanwhile, a shabby tug of war was taking place to prevent mobilization of any of the Marine Corps' 30 reserve aviation squadrons. The Air Force Chief of Staff, General Vandenberg, had been unalterably opposed to sending any Marine aviation to Korea because he thought Marines should not have their own aviation. Carl Vinson intervened, and on 23 July, the Marine Corps was given permission to activate 6 fighter and 3 support squadrons. A week later, after another intervention by Carl Vinson, 2 more reserve aviation squadrons were mobilized. Vinson also intervened in early August to direct the 7th Marine Regiment activation for the Marine Division. MacArthur's reply to the JCS said, 10 to September, not November or December. He wrote he was planning on an amphibious operation on with 2 division corps Corps in the rear of the enemy lines for the purpose of enveloping and destroying enemy forces in conjunction with an attack from south by the 8th Army. On 25 July, the JCS gave in and directed the 1st Marine Division be brought to war strength and to mount out from San Diego. Included were the words, "with attached air." While the Marines mobilized for war, planning in Tokyo continued. MacArthur's landing place, Inchon, had all the characteristics, the worst possible place for an amphibious operation. The tidal range is about 32 feet, among the highest in the world. The changing tides expose wide, gray, oozing mud flats, backed at high tide in some places by seawalls and swampy bottomland. Currents in the channels rarely drop below 3 knots, and in the main channels run its face, Inchon had all the characteristics, the worst possible place for an amphibious operation. The tidal range is about 32 feet, among the highest in the world. The changing tides expose wide, gray, oozing mud flats, backed at high tide in some places by seawalls and swampy bottomland. Currents in the channels rarely drop below 3 knots, and in the main channels run as high as 8 knots, close to the speed of a landing craft. The approach channel to Inchon is a dead-end street with little, if any, sea room to facilitate ship or landing craft or turning maneuver. The waters at Inchon are easily mineable and are commanded by terrain well suited for coastal defense batteries. Inchon is a harbor of breakwaters and seawalls. The Inchon port is dominated and the city masked by a mile-long harbor island named Womido, which means moon-tipped island, which divides the harbor in two and blocks the ways to Inchon. Having Womido in Marine hands was essential. There were no typical beaches for this operation. This is by the way, on the back of your programs. The beaches available were more like a seawall or a pier. Admiral Doyle selected 3. Green Beach is on Womido. It's a 200-yard strip on the northwest shore of Womido. It's really rocks with patches of sand. It's not a beach. Backed by a row of revetment and a ridge. Red Beach is 220 yards of seawall. It's north of Womido, running north from the mainland routes of the causeway, which join Womido immediately inland to the dismal industrial area with railroad yards, a tank farm, and a Japanese brewery. At low tide, Red Beach's 1,000-yard mud flats have the crust and underlying gooey consistency of chocolate fudge, but the smell is quite different. Blue Beach, an area on the other side of Inchon, 4 miles southeast of Red Beach, with a 14-foot seawall backed by salt pans and some 4,500 yards of mud flats. The World War II LSDs required at least 29 feet of water of such magnitude prevail at Inchon only once a month for a space of maybe 3 days. At no other time could a landing be made. 2 approach channels lead from the Yellow Sea and converge about 9 miles below Inchon at a tiny island, Palmido, which juts up in mid-channel just where the 2 approaches join. Inchon and its approach channels were ideal for mines. The North Koreans must have agreed with the assessment that Inchon was the worst possible place. Inchon Harbor had yet to be mined, although plans were in place. Defending Inchon was a force of 2 raw infantry battalions of new conscripts and 2 harbor defense batteries. Beyond the seaport Inchon is Kimpo Airfield, the Han River, and Seoul, the South Korean capital. At the start of the war, Seoul had a population of 2 million. It was in Seoul where the North Korean Army set up its headquarters. In the city of Seoul was the North Korean Army's 18th Rifle Division, numbering 14,000 soldiers, plus an anti-aircraft artillery regiment. Support was provided by the 10th Railroad Regiment, plus a security battalion. Operating from Kimpo Airfield were 19 propeller-driven North Korean Yak with a security regiment defending. And this is the only pictures I could find of those old Yaks. This is from the museum in Pyongyang, North Korea. Operation Chromite was the code name for the Inchon landing, and D-Day had to be 15 September, as it was the only day in September with the extreme tides at Inchon putting more than 30 feet of water over the mudflats. Not until October 11th would there be at least 30 feet of water. Thus, September 15th had to be the day. One hitch was that morning tide at Inchon was at 6:59 in the morning, 45 minutes after sunrise. The darkness prior making it too difficult for the LSTs to maneuver the approaches to the channel. The next high tide was 7:19 in the evening, 37 minutes after sunset, making offloading and subsequent operations ashore difficult because of nightfall. The new commanding general of 1st Marine Division was Major General O.P. Smith. If you could use one word to describe General O.P. Smith, you would say he was calm, a quality that would sustain him in the days ahead. He assumed his command at Camp Pendleton on the 25th of July, 21 days before the division would mount out. He grew up in Santa Cruz, and he attended UC Berkeley. He was known as a gentle warrior. He was highly respected for his intellect. During World War II, General Smith commanded the 5th Marine Regiment for the Cape Gloucester operation, and in March 1944, he was the 1st Marine Division's Assistant Division Commander for the Peleliu campaign, and he was the Deputy Chief of Staff with the 10th Army for the Okinawa battle. Arriving at Camp Pendleton, General Smith began assembling the 1st Marine Division. Marine reservists were flowing in to Camp Pendleton by the busload. Equipment from the Marine Corps Supply Depot at Barstow, California was transported to Camp Pendleton. The blessing being that the Marine Corps had rescued every vehicle and weapon system it could after World War II in the Pacific and brought all that equipment back to Barstow for retrofit. The Marine Corps throws nothing away. In August, the ships were loaded and the transport sailed between 14 and 18 August, destined for Japan. When the ship sailed, Major General Smith and his command staff flew to Tokyo to meet with MacArthur. On 23 August, MacArthur convened a conference to discuss the plans for Operation Chromite. The attendees at that meeting were General Collins, General Edwards, Admiral Sherman, Admiral Radford, Admiral Joy, Admiral Doyle, General Almond, the MacArthur's Chief of Staff. No Marines were invited, even though General Shepard and General Smith were in Tokyo. Alexander Haig wrote, President Truman sent the JCS to see MacArthur and dissuade him from executing that risky landing at Inchon. MacArthur said at the end of the table, after the last member of the Joint Chiefs spoke, MacArthur carefully placed his worn pipe in the ashtray before him, slowly stood up, and after a tension-getting pause, began to speak. He spoke for 45 minutes, and he said, the bulk of the enemy has been committed against the Pusan perimeter. A frontal attack out of the perimeter would cost 100,000 casualties. The North Koreans were unprepared for an enveloping attack, least of all at such places as Inchon. To land at a place further south would be easier for sure, but the results would be ineffective and indecisive. He went on to say, nothing in war is more futile than short envelopments. The amphibious landing is the most powerful tool we have. To employ it properly, we must strike hard and deep. I realize that Inchon is a 5,000 to 1 gamble, but I'm used to taking such odds. We shall land at Inchon, and I shall crush them. 5 days later, on 28 August, JCS signaled MacArthur that they concurred in the turning movement by amphibious forces on the west coast of Korea. Meanwhile, the Marine Division staff was planning so as to create realistic plans to deal with the problem of landing a Marine Division on 2 separate ocean tides on the 15th of September. For the first tide, the Marine planners recognized that Womido is the tactical key to Inchon. The planners concluded that Womido had to be captured first, with a separate landing on the morning tide across Green Beach, and that the main landings on Red Beach further north and Blue Beach to the south could then proceed on the second tide. However, how to put a battalion-sized landing force on the morning tide just after sunrise with the landing craft moving up the tortuous route in darkness prior to sunrise was the problem. The solution was to use instead 3 destroyer escorts rebuilt for raiding and landing light forces. The 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, plus parties of division artillery were to land on Womido using those craft. For the second tide that evening, the 5th Marines would land across Red Beach north of Womido, capture a network of abrupt hills that curve through Inchon, and link up by daylight with the 1st Marines. Landing across Blue Beach, south of town, the 1st Marines would seize a cutlet-shaped beachhead, hook left and then north to join the 5th Marines and attack east towards Yongdampo. Throughout the night, the LSTs would remain beached. And this is actually a photo of what really happened. They were beached. They were stranded, really, with vital supplies and vehicles being offloaded into the 5th Marines beachhead. The 7th Marines, only recently activated, would not arrive in the objective area until D+2. So for the Landing Force Reserve, the 1st Regiment of the Rock Marine Corps was designated and had to be withdrawn from the Pusan perimeter. The division staff completed the planning, including the detailed planning normally accomplished by the regiments. Because of the late arrival of the 1st and 5th Marines, had the division staff not done the planning, it would not have been done. Only because of the common background, well-tested doctrine, and long experience could the staff put together a viable plan. MacArthur's G3 in Tokyo, General Wright, urged MacArthur to designate Lieutenant General Shepard, the commander of all Marines in the Pacific, as the commander of 10th Corps, because he already had a functioning staff, and he had commanded the 6th Marine Division during the operations on Okinawa during World War II. General Wright wrote, "The 10th Corps headquarters must be one that can operate in the field as a going concern with such things as situation reports, operation reports, communications, etc. All that had to happen automatically. A provisional command group selected from general headquarters will not be a going concern, no matter how efficient individual officers are." MacArthur's Deputy Chief of Staff concurred emphatically and warned against the hasty throwing together of a provisional corps using the General Staff Headquarters officers. It would at best be only a half-baked affair. These recommendations were stopped at MacArthur's Chief of Staff's desk, Major General Ned Almond, and they were sent back with the notation, "Returned without action." 3 days later, Major General Almond selected a provisional 10th Corps staff and was named its commander. He would retain his other duties as MacArthur's Chief of Staff. General Almond's assignment as the 10th Corps commander was to plague Major General O.P. Smith and the entire 1st Marine Division for months to come and to cause unnecessary loss of human lives. Assigned to 10th Corps was the Army's 7th Division. It was one of the garrison SOP divisions in Japan. It was half strength on 26 July when assigned to 10th Corps, being short 416 officers and 8,700 enlisted men. 8,600 Koreans were gathered in Pusan and assigned to the 7th Division to fill its ranks under what was called the buddy system. Most were Korean civilians, stunned, confused, and exhausted. Only a few could speak English. They were garbed in the shirts, shorts, sandals, and cloth shoes they had when they were recruited by the 8th Army recruiters in Pusan. Fortunately for the 7th Division, ably commanded by Major General Barr, the entire school troops of non-commissioned officers from the schools at Infantry Fort Benning and Artillery at Fort Sill were uprooted and sent to war, providing a highly capable cadre of junior leaders. They were a godsend to General Barr, whose 18,000-man division had more than 1/3 non-English speaking civilians, and they faced commitment to combat in less than 1 month. By 8 September, with 1 week from D-Day, all planning was completed, and General Smith was to learn of a crackpot idea of Major General Almond to have a special operations company land the night before D-Day on Womido to be reinforced by 2 rifle companies from sources unspecified. After Smith explained how crazy the idea was, General Almond revealed another harebrained idea of having the same company seize Kempo Airfield. General Smith had to explain reality, including the fact that the rubber boats the Special Operations Company would paddle in to reach Inchon shores would be fighting a current faster than any crew could paddle against without being swept out to sea. The final complication was the release of 5th Marines from the Pusan perimeter. The performance of the regiment in the Pusan perimeter was so stellar, the 8th Army was reluctant to let them go. General Walker, the 8th Army commander, wanted to retain his Marines. General Almond proposed substituting the 32nd Infantry from the 7th Division to replace the 5th Marines in the 1st Marine Division to land at Inchon. The fact that 40% of the 32nd Infantry were Korean civilians who didn't speak English, and the fact that the regiment had no amphibious training didn't seem to matter. General Smith was to remark that there seemed to be a total lack of understanding of amphibious operations at the general headquarters. Finally, after several meetings, MacArthur directed 8th Army to release the 5th Marines on 6 September, giving it 9 days to assemble, complete planning, embark aboard amphibious shipping, and be ready to lead the amphibious assault on D-Day. While amphibious operations are known to be the most complicated of all operations in war, and ordinarily demand painstaking rehearsals, for Operation Chromite, time precluded any rehearsal of the amphibious operation on Inchon. Complicating events called friction in the processes as the landing force prepared for the assault. On September 5th, the Secretary of the Navy directed at the last minute that any enlisted Marine who was yet to be 18 had to be transferred to non-combatant duty. This act cost the 1st Marine Division 500 trained Marines, many of whom had already fought in the Pusan perimeter. Meanwhile, the 5th Marine Regiment was withdrawn from heavy combat, having been relieved in place by Army troops at the Pusan perimeter at midnight of September 5th. The Marines were marched in heavy rain 8 miles, then trucked 50 miles, prepared for and embarked after distributing plans, receiving replacements, building scaling ladders, and equipping and schooling the Korean Marine Corps Regiment on amphibious operations. They did it all and were underway by 12 September. General O.P. Smith wrote General Craig, the brigade commander, "I appreciate the beating you're taking in coming out of action and mounting out. Only Marines could do what you are doing. The brigade has done a splendid job in South Korea, and we're proud of you. You have put the rest of us on the spot. I look forward to seeing you on Womido." General Almond's direction, Brigadier General Hodes, the Assistant Division Commander of the 7th Division, approached General Smith on the 9th of September with a scheme to land an infantry battalion of the 7th Division on Womido on the evening tide of D-Day, across the same beaches already scheduled to land 2 battalions of Marine artillery, which were necessary to support the landings on beaches Red and Blue. General Hodes proposed borrowing tanks from the Marines and barreling down the road in a deep thrust through pitch darkness to take the high ground south of Seoul, some 20 miles inland. This insane scheme was logistically out of the question, and General Smith said so. It was 2 days after D-Day before that battalion got ashore. If the presence of a typhoon wasn't enough of a distraction, MacArthur, accompanied by 5 other generals, aides, and a suite, had decided to observe his battle from the amphibious command ship and was traveling to the coast where the U.S. Mount McKinley was to embark them. This forced the flagship to divert from her station with the attack force, losing precious hours working in and out of harbor. There was only so much space on the ship. An amphibious command ship is not a royal yacht. She's built for a specific purpose, and workspace is simply short at best. MacArthur's party boarded on D-3, and the flagship got underway and hastily moved to rejoin the attack force. Operation Chromite was executed as planned. This slide is a painting of the situation of the Marines faced in scaling the seawall. It hardly resembles what we might call a beach. I won't attempt to describe the battles that took place during the operations ashore, except to describe the actions of Able Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. After landing across Red Beach at 5:33 p.m. during the second high tide. Facing Able Company was a hill 130 feet high. It was labeled Cemetery Hill, and it was dominated beach red and had to be taken. Able Company was under heavy fire from a bunker on the left flank. This is a photo of First Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez, a World War II Navy veteran and a recent Annapolis graduate. He was leading his platoon over the seawall after he landed his 3rd platoon. Shortly afterwards, he hurled a grenade and took out the bunker to his front. He then pulled the pin and drew back to throw a second grenade into another bunker. A burst of fire caught him in his right arm and shoulder, and he fell down. The grenade striker flicked up, the primer popped and sputtered, and smoke began to reach on his wounded arm. "Grenade," he cried, then lurching toward the deadly thing, got it crooked under his elbow, cradled it into his body, and so died. First Lieutenant Lopez was awarded the Medal of Honor. All these events took place during the first 5 minutes of the landing. Captain John Stevens, who had heroically commanded Able Company unscathed all through the Pusan perimeter actions, including his company's heroic counterattack on 18 August on Obang Ni Ridge, breaking the North Korean military's advance, he landed on Red Beach and directed the actions of his company to continue an attack to take Cemetery Hill and clear Beach Red, at a cost of 8 dead and 28 wounded Marines requiring evacuation. John Stevens, he introduced me, he's with us here today. John, we salute you. General Smith left the ship on D+1 saying goodbye to Admiral Doyle. The two men had worked together for 25 days under the most harmonious of circumstances, and they had created a successful instrument of amphibious force projection that is still studied by military students throughout the world. By 28 September, Seoul had been retaken. The fighting had been fierce. The friction of war was increased several times by General Almond, interfering with the 1st Marine Division's commanding general, a pattern that would continue for the next phases of the Korean War. Almond was keen on giving orders to the regimental and battalion commanders without coordinating with Major General Smith, causing much confusion and potential disastrous situations. Operation Chromite was a success. The North Korean Army had been cut off, and the North Koreans were retreating back into North Korea across the 38th parallel. Operation Chromite had been successful. To say that it changed the entire course of the war is an understatement. It accomplished the following. It caused the disintegration of the North Korean perimeter about Pusan, liberated the national capital, dislocated the logistics system of the communists, brought about the destruction of the Inmin gun. It returned the United Nations to the 38th parallel and preserved the Republic of Korea. It underscored what America had nearly forgotten in the 5 years since World War II, that America is a maritime power, and her weapon is the trident and her strategy that of the oceans. 71,399 soldiers, sailors, Marines, airmen, and ROK troops landed at Inchon and bore their part of the battle. The cost was 536 killed in action or died of wounds, 2,550 wounded, and 65 missing in action. The Marines paid the highest price, with 422 killed, 2,031 wounded, and 6 missing in action. It is estimated that the North Korean soldiers, that 14,000 North Korean soldiers were killed and 7,000 were taken prisoner. A truly key person in the success of Operation Chromite was Major General O.P. Smith. He is shown here on the cover of the 25 September 1950 Time magazine. He would continue to lead the 1st Marine Division in even more trying times in Korea, demonstrating exceptional character. Admiral Doyle, the commander of the Amphibious Task Force, wrote in his after-action report, "Under the circumstances, it is my conviction that the successful assault on Inchon could only have been accomplished by United States Marines. This conviction, I am certain, is shared by everyone who planned, executed, or witnessed the assault. My statement is not to be construed as a comparison of the fighting qualities of various armed forces. It simply means that because of many years of specialized training in amphibious warfare in conjunction with the Navy, only the United States Marines had the requisite know-how to formulate the plans with the limited time available and to execute those plans flawlessly without training or a rehearsal. To put another way, I know that if any other unit of our armed forces had been designated, that unit would have required many, many months of specialized training, including joint training with the Navy, which is a regular part of the Marines' everyday life. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, General Mayor, for your comprehensive and great, tremendous briefing and presentations. So as she did a wonderful job, so my presentations, my remarks will be short, in brief. Don't worry about that. Okay, the Honorable Peter McCloskey, Congressman and the President of the Korean War Memorial Foundation, and dear veterans and families, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor and privilege to be here with all of you today. I would like to express my deep gratitude to Marine Memorial Association for the kind invitation. This event is very meaningful because today in Korean times is the Korean Thanksgiving Day. So thank you very much for organizing this wonderful event. Well, this year marks the 63rd year since the Korean War broke out. Without your heroism, valor, and sacrifice, today's Korea would not be enjoying peace, democracy, and economic prosperity. We Koreans were able to build our country from the ashes just after the Korean War to the 13th largest economy in the world. Of course, with the assistance, with the full support of the United States. Korea is a very unique country in the world because Korea is transformed from aid recipient country to aid donor country. This is our way of paying forward to the world what we received during our time of need. There is a Korean saying, there is a friend in need is a friend indeed. So we'll continue to reach out to people in need worldwide in return for your support. This year also marks the 60th anniversary of the military alliance between Republic of Korea and this great country, the United States. The two countries' relationship is often called a blood alliance. You know, the Korea and the United States have almost nothing in common in terms of culture, geography, and history. But we fought together to defend Korea against communism. Well, 63 years ago, today is the day when General MacArthur successfully landed his forces on Inchon, which paved the way for reversing the tide of the Korean War, as General Mayer mentioned. Well, the majority of the forces involved in the operation were the brave U.S. Marines. You know, their contribution to our victory in the Korean War was so crucial. Inchon has transformed enormously from a barren and devastated area to one of the best international airports, one of the most beautiful green cities, and one of the largest tidal power plants. Korea has changed drastically over the last 6 decades. But there is one thing that will remain forever unchanged. That is our gratitude. That means the Koreans toward all the Korean War veterans. General MacArthur once said, "No, old soldiers never die, but they just fade away." But I'm very happy to have many, many old soldiers here, but who will never fade away in the hearts of the Korean people. You know, your contributions and your sacrifice and your devotions will be forever recorded in the history. Freedom is not free. That's why you deserve the title of a hero. I believe our future generations must be educated how pivotal the Korean War was and how important our bilateral relationship is. So in this context, the Korean War Memorial in the Presidio Park, propelled by Congressman McCloskey under his outstanding leadership, will serve as a good place for the education of younger generations. Let me close my remarks by extending my full sincere congratulations to today's awardees. Thank you very much for your attention. God bless America. God bless Korea. God bless all of you. Thank you.
An award to Second Lieutenant Pete McCloskey, United States Marine Corps. He was awarded the Navy Cross on May the 29th, 1951 in Korea. And this says, "Semper Fidelis from your fellow Marines and brothers in arms. We honor you because you've honored us by your extraordinary valor in combat and your selfless devotion to corps and country." He went on, by the way, to be elected for 8 terms in Congress. And he had one thing characteristic that we all talk about, Pete McCloskey. Not only does he have physical courage, but he has moral courage. And he takes stands where he thinks it's important. And I'm really honored to present this to, I call him Congressman Pete McCloskey. And also now the Korean Consul General is presenting him a Korean certificate of appreciation for what he's done. Thank you all so much. I'll tell you that Denny Weisgerber was promoted to gunnery sergeant last year, like 30 years after he was supposed to be. Yeah. But this young Marine was awarded the Navy Cross for his heroism October the 2nd, 1952 in Korea. And what he did with his life, the Marine Corps wouldn't let him stay in because he lost a leg. So today Marines are staying in if they lose a leg. He couldn't stay in, so he came back and I think he became mayor of a town down in Silicon Valley, and he's just continued to contribute. This says, "Semper Fidelis from your fellow Marines and brothers in arms. We honor you because you've honored us by your extraordinary valor in combat, your selfless devotion to corps and country. September 18th, 2013. Gunnery Sergeant Weisberg." And now the Consul General is permitting him the Korean Certificate of Appreciation. A big hand for Gunnery Sergeant Denny Weisgerber. And this is to Master Sergeant Bruce Kim, Rock Marine Corps. Yeah. Now, Master Sergeant Kim was awarded the Medal of Honor 4th grade on 15 September 1950 at Inchon, Korea. and this is Semper Fidelis from your fellow Marines and brothers in arms. We honor you because you've honored us by your extraordinary valor in combat and your selfless devotion to corps and country. Before I give it to him, I have to tell you that the closest relationship of any Marine Corps with the United States Marine Corps is the Korean Marine Corps. So with this, congratulations. All right. Now the Korean Consul General Certificate of Appreciation. Big hand, folks.
I would now also like to recognize and welcome and show our appreciation to some special guests. Consul General Han, one of our Korean War Memorial Foundation Board of Directors, Quentin Kopp, former State Senator, San Francisco Supervisor, and Superior Court Judge, San Mateo County, Man Jae Kim, Vice President of the Korean War Memorial Foundation, and a prominent restaurateur in San Francisco. Hyung Ryu, Chairman of the Korean Center. Is he present? Give him a hand anyway. Captain Schaefer, U.S. Navy veteran of the Korean War. Did he make it? Captain. Lieutenant Colonel Ed Brandy, Marine combat veteran, Korean War. Greg DeRigo, Managing Editor, ABC 7, KGO TV News. Strong supporter of Korean War veterans. And we'd also like to recognize the committee members that helped pull this lunch together. Another Korean War Memorial Foundation Director, U.S. Merchant Marine veteran of the Korean War, Frank Mendez. Marine Corps combat veteran of the Korean War, Sergeant Don Reed. Also Treasurer, Korean War Memorial Foundation. Gunnery Sergeant Wendy Schumann, who helped pull all this together for the Marines Memorial Club. Thank you, Gunny. And of course, John Stevens, Colonel, United States Marine Corps.
Lest he be overlooked, Admiral Tom Brown, a great supporter of the Korean War Memorial Foundation. Thank you. I'm a banker, so that's why I was appointed to become the treasurer of the Korean War Memorial. And I'd like to say a few things. I'll be brief. First thing I'd like to very much thank the Consul General and also the Marines Memorial Club, General Myatt. Yes, indeed. And I have the honor to represent this group of wonderful officers and gentlemen, and we're doing an absolutely great job in putting together a project that's really going to be historical. And we have a mission of raising $3.3 million. We're on our way. We have raised almost $350,000 right now, and it's really been wonderful. We're gathering great support, and it's going to be really an outstanding site. The location is going to be with a view of the Golden Gate and facing Korea and facing in the same direction as the Inchon landing. And the sculpture is going to be done beautifully. It's going to be reminiscent of, and it's going to be a perfect image of the landing at Iwo Jima, and Inchon, and it's showing Bartolomeo Lopez going over the wall, and it's really a beautiful depiction of him. The dedication site was last month, and we had a good turnout. We had around 250 people show up, and we're really on our way. And let's think in terms of the future. Next year, we're inviting the Korean ambassador to the United States, from Korea. He's going to show up, hopefully, and we've asked him to gather the soil from 6 battlefields where the Marines fought with the other services as well, and those battle sites are going to be preserved there as part of the soil at the Presidio, and they're going to represent the battles of Busan and Inchon and Seoul and the Punch Bowl operation and Bunker Hill and also the Panmunjom. Also, we're going to invite for the opening of the monument the President of the Republic of Korea, and we're hoping that she's going to join us. We're on our way, and we're going to accomplish this, and it's going to be truly an historic achievement. Thank you for your attention. God bless you.
Would the Korean War veterans please stand and be recognized? I got a special request from Congressman McCloskey to ask if there are any Navy hospital corpsmen present. Would you please stand up?
Lord, we just thank you for this wonderful presentation today and this wonderful time of camaraderie with all of our Korean War veterans and all of their families that are here. As I said at the outstart, please put your loving arms around all of them. Give them guidance and a safe trip home so that we may all meet here again a year from now to celebrate and commemorate the 64th anniversary of the Korean War. Lord, we just ask your blessing upon everyone here and their families, all our military, wherever they may be. Put your loving arms around them. Bring our men and women home safely. Amen.